Thanks for joining us. Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community. Welcome to the podcast. For now, tune in to this episode of our broadcast. Today, we're going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our team. You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. It's a great honor to have with us former Democratic Congressman from New York. He was born in the Bronx, but he's from Florida, Peter Deutsch. It was from 1993 to 2005. And
That's
now
correct.
he runs the largest and the first, charter school for Jews that's in Florida. So welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us.
It's not just for Jews, it's Hebrew English charter. We have some Gentiles in the school as well.
I think you have to. If you're a charter school, you have to have everybody, correct?
Right.
But mostly Jews.
At least in the flagship school, that's correct.
We'll get to talk about that. You've been a Democratic loyalist this time around. You're voting for Donald Trump. What happened to you?
Well, I'm not just voting for Donald Trump, but I really, I've changed my life in the short term to campaign for the last month in Pennsylvania. I actually, my daughter lives in Israel. I have 4 grandchildren. She just had a baby on.
That's what's up.
Thank you. On September 21st. But I decided I want to support Donald Trump, and the campaign asked me to fly in for the event that he had on October 7th. I flew in, I endorsed him. And then the campaign, I was actually going to fly back to Israel on Thursday for Yom Kippur. And I was at the airport in Miami, and the campaign said, hey, listen, can you go to Pennsylvania and spend a couple of weeks in Pennsylvania talking to Jewish voters in Pennsylvania, which I've done. I've actually been in Pennsylvania since October 10th. And I'm leaving Pennsylvania tomorrow from JFK on a flight back to Israel.
Wow.
God willing.
So what made you decide? Because you didn't vote for Donald Trump 4 years ago, correct?
Correct.
So
right.
why now all of a sudden are you saying, hey, not only am I going to vote for Donald Trump, I'm going to stump for him?
Listen, I think everyone who has voted or everyone who's going to vote, before the polls close in a couple of hours, goes through a thought process of why they're voting for a candidate. For me, the most important job for the president of the United States is to achieve and maintain peace in the world. And, if you look at the 4 years of President Trump, we had peace, we had prosperity, we had no wars. If you look at the 4 years of the Harris-Biden administration, we literally had wars, we had death, we had destruction. And there's specific policy reasons that happened. I mean, the biggest policy difference regarding that is how the two administrations dealt with Iran. I mean, 180-degree difference in terms of dealing with Iran, which unfortunately, I think has led to some of the severe consequences, including what happened on October 7th. And I think that there's a real danger if Kamala Harris is elected that they will be dramatically worse in the short term and into the future.
So you voted for Joe Biden 4 years ago, correct?
I did.
You're disappointed in his policy because really, even though Harris is part of the team, Joe Biden is really the engine that drove all the decisions that are made in the last 4 years. She stood by him and she covered for him, but at the end of the day, Joe Biden initiated these decisions.
Listen, I think that she is, as we talked before the show, I think she really is dramatically worse than he is in a lot of ways, in specific ways. People have seen it in their own eyes over the last couple of weeks. A week ago, someone stood up at a meeting and said, how Israel is committing genocide. Anyone who understands, what genocide is, it's absurd that, any intelligent person can utter those words out of their mouth. But you can watch her shaking her head in agreement at the end of the meeting saying, hey, that person has good points. As bad as it was, there's multiple examples of her saying that. I mean, maybe the worst thing that she has said is she has literally in her own words said that what has happened in Gaza since October 7th is a binary decision. It's not a binary decision. There's one side that it's horrific, and there's another side that is really trying to provide human dignity and safety for its people. I mean, I think that there's, and again, we could talk about the differences if you want to focus on, but I don't think it's worth that much time focus, but we can. Other differences between Biden and Harris in terms of how they've responded to the Middle East. But let me really focus on, I think, the major issue in terms of the two candidates. I mean, you have one candidate that the big change, there were two big changes of these administration. President Trump, when he got into office, literally on the first day, effectively said that he cut off the funding for Iran. After 4 years, as he talked about at the end of his administration, Iran, for all intents and purposes, was bankrupt. They didn't have the money to give their terrorist proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. Biden, Harris, the first day they came into office, they basically switched policies and allowed Iran to get money through a variety of sources. And the conservative number is that they actually got at least $100 billion during the last 4 years. And they've spent that giving money to their terrorist proxies in terms of the horrific things that they've done. And it's not just the money, it's really the willing use of American force to project American force. The reality is, President Trump eliminated Soleimani, projected American force. As a senator, Kamala Harris literally, in her own words, criticized the elimination of Soleimani. And so you have two candidates, one candidate who literally wants to give money to people that want to and have killed your family. I mean, that's
Americans too. Americans
correct.
Also.
When I say your family, I say Americans. I mean, the actions that have happened since October 7th, Americans have been killed, Israelis have been killed, other foreign nationals have been killed. And you have another candidate that for 4 years protected your family and really, created peace in the world. And again, to your point, though, that you just mentioned, this is an American issue. It's not an Israeli issue. When Iran sent 200 ballistic missiles to Israel a couple of weeks ago, their goal is to put nuclear warheads on those missiles, not to just destroy Israel, but to destroy the United States. When you can go online, you can look for yourself. The Iranian parliament, on the floor of the Iranian parliament, almost on a regular basis, the parliamentarians themselves, not just the people in the gallery, are screaming death to America. Within the last, within the last couple of weeks, the Biden administration has acknowledged that Iran has attempted to assassinate Donald Trump on American soil. These are our enemies, not just as America, but as Israel, but all of the world. They should be their enemy. They are our enemies. And sometimes I wonder, whether Kamala Harris understands, whose side is she on? Is she on Iran's side? Is she on America's side? I mean,
but that's so Joe Biden. Joe Biden was the same way.
I think he proved to be that exact same way.
Are you disappointed that you voted for him 4 years ago?
Let me tell you, I should not have said it that way. My vote 4 years ago was a secret ballot. Okay, I mean, and so I'm not going to acknowledge that I voted for Joe Biden. I'm not going to talk about who I voted for 4 years ago. Okay, so that was a misstatement as the interview began. But I'm not going to defend him in any shape, manner, or form. But I will tell you that this administration, there really is a parallel to the way that Neville Chamberlain dealt with the Nazis and Hitler before World War II. I mean, there's an unfortunate real parallel. I mean, Neville Chamberlain went to Hitler and told the British people, hey, listen, we got to work with him. We got to get along with him. We can just imagine what would have happened in the world had Winston Churchill not come into power and really understood the evil that the Nazis and Hitler were. That's the same thing in terms of their approach to Iran. I mean, they are evil. They need to be destroyed. I mean, President Biden said to the Israeli government after the ballistic missile attack, hey, Israel, you can't attack the nuclear weapon system in Iran. You can't attack their oil. President Trump had the exact, again, publicly he stated, hey, Israel ought to destroy their nuclear weapon system now. This was the opportunity. I mean, there can't be a clearer thing. And I think when we talk about the stakes involved in this election, I mean, that's what the stakes really are. I mean, literally, that's what the stakes are. And I don't think it's a close call. I think, I agree with President Trump. I mean, any person that, I actually think any person that votes Kamala Harris ought to have their head examined, but particularly people who care about the future of the state of Israel, but really any American because of the differences on these issues.
However, even though the number of votes that Donald Trump is going to get from the Jewish community will be better than he did 4 years ago or 8 years ago, but still a large majority of American Jews are going to vote for Kamala Harris. So with the exception of the Orthodox community, I think the polls show it could be close to 90%, maybe even higher, are going to vote for Donald Trump. But the rest of the Jewish community is going to be going pretty strongly for the Democrats and Kamala Harris. So what do you say to our fellow Jews?
Well, I think there's two things. One is I think what I'm willing to put money on the table that Donald Trump in this election will have a higher percentage of Jews vote for him than any Republican in the history of keeping track of this fact.
Even Reagan? Even more than Reagan?
Again, I think that if you look at the data points, I think we're going to get to that high number. I mean, I actually think we will get close to that, if not exceed that number. And I guess there's a couple of things. One is, I think part of it is that people have not heard the story. I think my experience has been talking to, and I've been almost exclusively talking to Democratic Jewish voters, persuadable Jewish voters who, when I start the conversation, are either inclined to vote for Harris or struggling with who to vote for. Unfortunately, when I spend 45 minutes laying out sort of some of the things I've just explained to you, almost everyone moves off that position. I mean, and I think that there's a certain amount of cognitive dissonance, involved here that, hey, they care about Israel. It might not be the most important issue, but they don't really understand the different implications of the two candidates. And sometimes they get, they see people like John Fetterman or Josh Shapiro, and others who, historically, and particularly Fetterman. I mean, Fetterman's position since October 7th is as clear, as anyone position of anyone in the country, Democrat, Republican, but he still is, out there supporting Kamala Harris. So they see people like that and they say to themselves, well, how bad can she really be? She could be really bad. I think, again, the position that she holds is indefensible. I mean, I can mention again, I told you I could spend the entire time we're talking about the differences. Again, people can see this for themselves. They can go online and look at it themselves. She's had several occasions when she's talked about the weapon systems that Israel has stopped providing, that America has stopped providing Israel since October 7th. Okay, there's only one publicly acknowledged position, but when she talks about it, she talks about it glowingly, and on more than one occasion, really happily about how Israel, how America stopped, restricted this particular weapon system, and how we can do more, like happily, about that. And that is obviously a concern for anyone who's concerned about Israel's survival. And I think what's also clear, I mentioned the nuclear potential attack, but there's no question that the war has been executed differently than Israel wanted to, in terms of restrictions that America put on a variety of things that Israel, and they're still doing it today. They're literally, they've threatened the United States. The administration, the Harris-Biden administration, has threatened the United States in terms of, hey, if you don't do what we tell you in North Gaza, then we're going to, everything's on the table. Everything's on the table. Literally, anyone who understands what's happened since October 7th, understands that unfortunately it's a tragic thing, but more Israeli soldiers have died because of the restrictions that have been put on by the United States. She literally has blood on her hands because of the actions of the Harris-Biden administration.
Our guest is former Congressman Peter Deutsch of Florida, a Democrat. He's stumping now for Donald Trump. He splits his time between Israel and the United States. He runs a successful schools, Hebrew charter schools in Florida. From what I've been told is that the reason why Israeli casualties are much higher now in Gaza, could even be in Lebanon, is because of the administration, where before they can just bomb a building, now they have to send troops in. By doing so, they're exposing themselves to booby traps, snipers. That's why we see a higher casualty count, that pressure. And the pressure is, there was a letter, which I think people have denied, but a letter was out there saying that if Israel doesn't up humanitarian aid, they're going to, again, withhold weapons. It's a constant threat. You don't do this, we're taking away the weapons from you.
And again, first off, if you think about that, Israel is in an existential threat, an existential, war at this point in time. Just yesterday, another 4 soldiers died. I mean, unfortunately, almost on a daily basis, that's occurring. And when your best ally is restricting you in terms of what you're doing, I mean, and at the same time, the reality is that Israel has executed this war in a more civilian conscious way than any war in the history of the world. I mean, the number of the head of urban warfare at West Point has said what I'm just saying now. It's not me saying it, it's people who are professionals in this space have said the exact same thing, and the numbers prove it. The number of civilian casualties versus combatant casualties, the warnings that Israel does. No other country in the world does those types of things. And again, we grieve, and Senator Fetterman has said this as well as anyone, but we really do grieve at innocents dying. But I think at the same time, we understand that not one innocent would had died if Hamas didn't embed themselves amongst innocents. And not one more innocent would die from this day forward if Hamas would end the war. And, when Kamala Harris said, and I have to believe she believes it, that what's going on in Gaza is binary, that there's 2 sides to Gaza. That is morally bankrupt. I mean, it is distressing. It is morally bankrupt. I mean, a person that is morally bankrupt should not be president of the United States under any circumstance.
But she touts her Jewish husband, who's now the czar in anti-Semitism, right? Isn't he the anti-Semitism czar?
Listen, I mean, I think it's a whole nother issue, anti-Semitism. But when someone looks at the facts, there's been a fundamental difference how the Democrats and the Republicans has approached what has happened to this country in terms of anti-Semitism October 7th. I mean, there has been nothing concrete that this administration has done since October 7th. President Trump, while he was in office, issued an executive order about Title VI in the Education Act. Is the only protection that students on universities have. President Trump has made clear that he will deport any student that is involved in any of these activities. He's also made clear that any university in the country that's involved in this activity will stop getting their federal funding immediately, and legally that can be done. I mean, there's a total difference in terms of the actual bottom line approach. The only hearings that have been taking place on the anti-Semitism, which is rampant, I mean, almost every day, nothing that we've seen in this country really ever. The only hearings in Congress that have taken place in this are by the Republican-controlled House. I mean, the Democrat-controlled Senate has refused to have any hearings, has refused to take up the legislation regarding anti-Semitism on campuses. It is sad as a Democrat, because I still am a Democrat, of the status of what's happening.
Like Alan Dershowitz told me on this program that he left the Democratic Party. You still stayed in the Democratic Party, not leaving?
I haven't given up hope yet, but I will tell you again, I think that there are potentially some really fundamental structural problems with the Democratic Party. I mean, I think, number one, Donald Trump, there's no comparison between the 2 candidates in terms of who should be president for America and for the world. I mean, it is just so clear. And I tell you, an interesting perspective that I have, and I haven't seen anyone talk about this, but it's a fascinating sort of thing that President Trump has gotten the endorsement of the Democratic mayor of the first city in the country that had an all-Muslim city commission in Michigan. Also, Dearborn Heights mayor has also endorsed him. And if you've seen it again online, you can go online and talk about it. You can see it. The comments of both of these people and others that have been at press conferences in the Arab community in America supporting Donald Trump, it's really sort of fascinating. Their comments about why they're supporting him are almost word for word the same comments that I started the conversation with. I mean, this is a guy who has proved that he can have peace. And I think for most Arabs, and I think most American Arabs who are of Arab descent, I think most of them, not all of them obviously, but most of them, what they really want is peace. And it's going to take someone who's willing to use force to create peace.
By the way, I think, I'm not in the voting booth, but I would speculate that New York City Mayor Eric Adams is voting for Donald Trump too.
I'm sure he is.
I believe so.
I think that we don't know. I mean, at this point, I mean, after the election is over, there'll be all sorts of speculation. But I think that the big story that I see on the ground, and again, there's been some press accounts on it at this point. The big story is that Donald Trump, besides doing better in the Jewish community, which is potentially significant if the vote, I came to Pennsylvania that Thursday morning when I was literally at the airport about to get on a plane to Tel Aviv. Instead, I got on a plane to Philadelphia. The big story at that point in time, what the campaign said to me, there were 20,000 persuadable or undecided Jewish voters in Pennsylvania. And if we win by 1,000 votes, 2,000 votes, 5,000 votes in Pennsylvania, I'm going to take credit for it, because I think we've changed, at least that, not me alone. It's an effort. It's a team effort. There's a bunch of people on the ground that have really focused on the Jewish community. There's millions of dollars that have been, spent in terms of reaching out to the Jewish community in Pennsylvania. But there's so many things going on in terms of that, in terms of the effort that's taking place. But I think the other interesting sort of story of the election is that Donald Trump absolutely will be doing better, maybe again, than any Democrat, and I mean, any Republican in history, in the Black community in America and the Hispanic community in America. And, just even in terms of the numbers, in terms of turnout, I mean, all the accounts, the only data that I think is relevant at this point that I've seen in terms of who's going to win in a couple of hours, is that the turnout is lower than historically in, again, data I've seen in every Black community in the United States of America. And even because why, in general, I mean, I don't think the Black community hates Donald Trump. I mean, there might be individual Blacks, just the same way there are individual Jews, individual Asian Americans, individual Arab Americans hate Donald Trump. But as a community, the reality is as president, he did an incredible job. I mean, he, did the, statute that allowed, tax incentives for minority or really underserved, bad economic areas in the United States of America. That's had a huge success. He was able to pass a crime bill that no one ever thought was going to get elected. I mean, to get adopted. And so, that we don't know what the story of the results of this election are going to be at this point. But I think if I were to bet, I think that's going to be the story of the election. And I think, President Trump, I think, is going to win. And America's going to have a really fantastic 4 years, if not more.
Our guest is former Florida Congressman, Democratic Congressman Peter Deutsch. He's stumping for Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. He splits his time between Israel and the United States, has some Hebrew charter schools in Florida. When you were in the House, did you have a good relationship with Chuck Schumer?
Yeah, actually, I did. Yeah.
Are you surprised that the way he's been conducting himself vis-a-vis Columbia University and anti-Semitism and even Israel and Gaza?
Listen, I think, unfortunately, the reality in the Democratic Party now is there's 51 Democratic senators. And of the 51 Democratic senators, literally probably 25 of them are to different degrees anti-Israel. I mean, literally, of the 51, I would categorize. Now, again, that's
a large number.
Right. Again, there's some who are worse than others. I put Bernie Sanders and Senator Kaine and
AOC.
Well, she's not a senator; she's in the House.
In the House, right? Yeah.
Right. But in terms of the Senate, so there's half of his caucus that is at some degree of anti-Israel at this point in time. He's the leader of that caucus by the caucus decision. He is elected by the caucus to be the majority leader of the United States Senate. I think Chuck Schumer, as many people in life, sort of have cognitive dissonance. If he were the leader in terms of the pro-Israel members of the United States Senate Democratic caucus, his position as leader of that caucus, I think, he feels it would be in jeopardy. And so I don't think that, again, I think in his mind, whatever he thinks, he is not going to put himself in a position to, sort of challenge his position as leader of the Democratic caucus. I would put actually Governor Josh Shapiro in a similar situation. I mean, Josh Shapiro actually worked for me for 2 years when I was a member of Congress. He was a junior staff member, but I knew him. The congressional offices are not that big. I mean, I know his sort of record in terms of activism in the Jewish community. he might be president of the United States. He has a good chance of being president of the United States, or at least a reasonable chance.
But he backpedaled. He's supposed to be a strong supporter. He backpedaled about an article about Zionism.
Right, but not just that, though. I think him supporting Kamala Harris. Why is he supporting Kamala Harris? Well, I'll tell you, one of the realities is that if he didn't support Kamala Harris, his chance of being president of the United States would go to zero.
Listen, had she picked him, I think she'd be in a stronger position.
There's no question that the worst strategic move that she made was not picking him as her vice presidential nominee. Because let me tell you, every analytical data point of this election points to Pennsylvania as the key state today. Whoever wins Pennsylvania almost for sure will be the nominee. Other states, the mathematical form, there's a reason why Elon Musk has basically spent the last month and a half in Pennsylvania. And there's a reason why I'm in Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania is the most important state today. It is the most important state today.
Very important place. I know a lot of research going into it. Now, what kind of message does it send where in the closing moments of the election, Kamala Harris meets with AOC, or you have Tim Walz, the vice president candidate, saying about AOC that she could be the Speaker of the House? Forget the fact that how come Jeffries is slated to be that if the Democrats could take over the House. What kind of message does it send that somebody who's an enemy of Israel, the enemy of the Jewish people, is being celebrated, not just at the convention, but by the president and vice presidential candidates?
Listen, I think part of what you're talking about is there are anti-Semites who are in the Democratic caucus in the United States Congress, real anti-Semites, and the reality is they're not criticized, they're not abandoned, they're endorsed. In the U.S. Senate race in Pennsylvania, which is really one of the marquee races in the country right now, the incumbent Democratic senator is supporting the anti-Semite congressional candidate, even after she's continuously said outright anti-Semitic things. Let me tell you, the campaign before I made the announcement in the press conference that they set up on October 7th at the same location that President Trump, had a meeting and a memorial for the victims of October 7th. They prepared a pretty extensive opposition research of Kamala Harris in terms of the Jewish community and Jewish issues in Israel. And one of the things that was interesting and well done in that opposition research is how many times she's met with anti-Semites. Not even listing the members of Congress that I just said. One of the pastors that gave a blessing at her and Joe Biden's inauguration is someone who is an anti-Semite. And I use that word very cautiously when I say it. She's met with multiple anti-Semites. So I think she's an anti-Semite? No. And it's just, it is listen, I have not been this involved in politics for 20 years. I'm out of Congress for 20 years. And I haven't worried about the Democratic Party probably for 20 years. But I'm worried now a lot. And I think I did not know what the word intersectionality meant until about 10 days ago. But if you spend time looking at what intersectionality and wokeism and DEI, the results are almost inevitably anti-Semitism. And if the Democratic Party effectively is a party that in a sense embraces intersectionality and wokeism, unfortunately, it's almost inevitable that it will be a party of people that are supportive of people who are anti-Semites.
That's a question. Should Kamala Harris lose the election, will that change the Democratic Party to go more to the left or more to the center?
Listen, I think the real challenge of the Democratic Party is how do they deal with this intersectionality, this wokeism? Are they going to accept it as the future, where really the leader of the Democratic Party in that situation really becomes AOC? AOC effectively is the person who personifies intersectionality in the Democratic Party.
And they're paying attention to her.
I'm sorry, what?
They're paying attention, whether it's Kamala Harris or Tim Walz.
Right, and what I'm saying, though, is not just could she easily be the Speaker of the House, she could be the presidential nominee for the Democratic Party in the next cycle. She is the person who epitomizes that perception of the world. That's a party which I think is morally bankrupt, is a party that almost by definition is a party that leads to anti-Semitism in the United States by a vast majority of people. and it's a party that I can't be part of, for sure. And I hope it doesn't happen, but I do think that there's a real possibility that it could happen if it's not already happening, if it's not already happened.
And when I speak to Alan Deutsch, he tells me he's become a pariah since he's embraced. He didn't say if he's voting for Trump, even though I believe he is, by just supporting him as far as, representing him. Have you had blowback from the Jewish community or elsewhere because of the fact that you're stumping for Donald Trump?
Listen, I have some people who are friends who hopefully will remain friends who've been critical. But let me kind of go through their criticisms. All right. Before I decided to endorse President Trump, I spoke with about 6 people who I'm friendly with, who I trust, who I have long relationships with, most of who were part of the sort of Democratic Party establishment at some level, at least several of who are incumbent members of the United States Congress. And I literally told them, hey, listen, I'm thinking of supporting Donald Trump. And I was really trying to get sort of a dialectic going. I was trying to hear their reasons why not to endorse Donald Trump. And the sort of best reason that people gave me was, hey, if Donald Trump gets elected, democracy is going to end. And so this is a real conversation I had with a sitting member of the United States Congress. And when I said that, and my response to that statement was, what's the percentage that you think democracy is going to end? And in seriousness, this is an intelligent person, a thoughtful person, although I wonder how thoughtful, having said this, but said, hey, there's a 75% chance that democracy is going to end, if Donald Trump gets elected. Now, first off, I wish I could bet against that because I think the chance is 0.00001%. But the follow-up question is how? I mean, first off, Donald Trump was president for 4 years, but on top of that, the framers of the United States created a checks and balances situation. I mean, there's a legislative branch, there's a judicial branch. Are you telling me that not just does Donald Trump want to end democracy, but all of the 50 plus United States senators in the Republican Party want to end democracy as well? And all the members of the House are going to go along with it, even if the Democrats control the House. I mean, what is the actualities? What, people don't get to that next step. And, I think that the reality is that this is,
it's a great campaign slogan because the Democrats say democracy will end if Donald Trump gets elected. Donald Trump says America will end if Kamala Harris gets elected. It's a great campaign slogan.
Well, listen, I'm telling you, the reality is that there's a better, I think even with Kamala Harris, it's a 0.0001% democracy is going to end. But I think you can make the case it's as much, if not more, because of what has been done regarding free speech. You can go into the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop. There's all sorts of things that from that side are as dangerous to democracy as anything that Donald Trump has done.
Well, in fact, there's bigger government. Why do they have the story about the squirrel that was killed by the ASPCA upstate New York, right? That the government's intruding. So that's really what it is. That's what they're saying, is right, that there's more government intrusion. So listen, it's the chapter's yet to be written. It's certainly going to be a different course, a different America after election votes are counted. So I want to thank you for joining us.
We're going to know pretty soon, about 4 hours. We're going to know a lot.
We may not know for days, is what they're saying.
We might not know for days, but we're going to know a lot more when we get results from Georgia. That'll be the first swing state, and we'll know a lot more when we get results from Georgia in a couple hours.
Anyway, thank you for being with us. I thank our mutual friend, Senator Gerber, for introducing us. Really enjoyed being with you, and we look forward to having you back. And thank you for, I know you're doing what you think is right, and the truth is there's so much going on, and that Israel's at stake. Iran is now poised to attack Israel with all kinds of sophisticated weapons. They executed a Jew in Iran, which I believe is retribution for the Israeli attack. There are 10,000 Jews in Iran that are going to be held hostage by the Iranian regime, that are being held hostages right now. I'm very concerned about that as well.
And let me just add one thing. It's 3:40 East Coast time. For anyone who hasn't voted, there's still time to vote. If anyone has friends or relatives or acquaintances in any of the 7 swing states in particular, and particularly in Pennsylvania, call them, make sure they voted, because we don't know if the election is going to be decided by 1 vote or 100 votes or 1,000 votes or 100,000 votes. But it might be, no one knows. If you go in on social media.
Every vote counts. Even in New York, we interviewed Thomas Sullivan running for Congress, and he lost by 15 votes.
Yeah,
last
I mean,
time around.
and so I really encourage people who are listening right now, because I know we're live on the air right now, that they need to vote. They need to contact anyone they know to get the vote. I told you I'm in a war room in Pennsylvania, in Center City, Philadelphia. They're still calling people. They're still texting people. They still have people knocking on doors, to really try to bring it in. And the reality is that the stakes are, what I talked about at many levels, at many levels. But from a security standpoint, I'm going to repeat it just because I think it's worth repeating, especially for people who haven't thought it through. I mean, you really have two candidates that are totally different in terms of their outlook, in terms of peace and security in the world. One who literally, her policies has given money to people that want to, and in fact have killed your family. And another candidate who for 4 years protected your family and really made the world safe and improved the lifestyle of probably everyone in the entire world.
Congressman, once a Congress, always going to do miss being in Congress, by the way?
I don't.
Okay. Former Congressman Peter Deutsch from Florida. He's now spends time in Israel and the United States. We've got to get to talk about charter schools. He has a bunch of charter schools in Florida. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. Thanks, Zev. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to Talk Line with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalkLineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalkLineNetwork.com.
On Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Anyway.